Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. The list of Vermont counties infected with the emerald ash borer now stands at 4. The invasive insect kills ash trees. It was first discovered in Orange County in February. A month later, EAB was confirmed in Washington and Caledonia counties. And earlier this month, the bug was found in the town of Stamford in Bennington County. Here's the latest from Meredith Whitney, the State Forest Pest Education Coordinator with UVM Extension.
Well, the latest that's happening with emerald ash borer is that it was most recently discovered in Bennington County. So that adds another county to, it's also in Washington, Caledonia, and Orange County, Vermont at this time. So that's the most recent discovery, and now that it's spread to a new part of the state, we're kind of looking at next steps and what will folks do to prepare.
What are those next steps?
Well, the state of Vermont will do another delimiting survey to determine the extent of the infestation in Bennington County, which is exactly what we did when we first found it in the town of Orange back in February.
In the counties where you've had infestation, communities are starting to make choices about how to treat it. What are some people doing?
We can kind of boil it down to 3 options really, but you can consider removing those trees before emerald ash borer arrives and replanting with a different species. You can use an insecticide to treat certain trees in your town to protect them from emerald ash borer. I know that Montpelier is a town that has been planning to use insecticide. And then the third option is to do nothing, which unfortunately is not the most desirable option because a tree that is diseased, unhealthy, dead is much more expensive and hazardous to remove than a healthy tree. So that's why some communities lean toward the preemptive removal approach, which usually does not look like cutting them all down at once. Many of the towns that have been doing this, Williston has actually been removing and replacing their ash trees over the past few years, and they'll do this gradually. Unfortunately, a lot of the signs, or more the symptoms of emerald ash borer are very similar to general tree decline. So in a lot of cases, we'll go look at an ash tree, you know, there's a little bit of crown dieback, branches are dead, there's not leaves when there should be, there are even woodpecker flecks, but might not have emerald ash borer. So in order for the state to officially confirm that we have this insect, we need to find an adult beetle or a larvae, or the galleries, the serpentine S-shaped galleries. And in Bennington County, it was actually first identified on a purple trap, which are hung with a scented lure to kind of see where the insect is. So that was a really good way to confirm it when you have an adult insect. So when we identify it, then we kind of look around to say, you know, how much is it already here in the state? And how much should we be worrying? Like if there's a big heavy infestation, you know, folks should be taking much more action. If it's a lighter infestation, we still have some time to take some steps to kind of prepare ourselves and maybe prevent the spread as much as we can. If you have ash trees, do you know what an ash tree looks like?
Kind of.
Okay. For the average Vermonter, you have an ash tree in your property, in your woods, and you start to notice some things looking weird about it. It's best to kind of put things together. Things to look for would be what we call crown dieback, or really just you know, loss of the overall canopy, the leaves in the tree. Signs of woodpecker activity, not like a big old pileated woodpecker hole. These are more like tiny holes and little flecks from the woodpecker's feet on the bark of the tree. You can also look in places where bark is off of the tree for those S-shaped galleries underneath the outer bark. And then if you see any adult beetles flying around, it's less likely that you'd see one in a low infestation, but you absolutely could. And if you do see one, get a photo or take a sample and call it in.
Meredith, emerald ash borer isn't the only pest you're keeping an eye out on. What are some other species you're looking for? Yeah,
so the Asian longhorn beetle is one that we're looking for. August is actually what they call tree check month for Asian longhorn beetle. So it's the best time of year to look out for the adult Asian longhorn beetle and signs and symptoms of that insect. It attacks maple trees. We don't have Asian longhorn beetle that we know of in Vermont yet, but if we did, it would be a huge devastation. So if you think that you see anything like that, again, go to vtinvasives.org. And then the other insect that we always have kind of in the back of our minds is the hemlock woolly adelgid. This is in parts of southern Vermont. It attacks hemlock trees. The damage that we've seen in Vermont has been minimal. I think that our weather has kept this insect in check just enough that it hasn't spread wildly. And this is when hemlock whale you wait a little bit more till the winter months to look for the signs of that insect. And so if you saw an invasive insect like invasive insects like emerald ash borer and the Asian longhorn beetle travel inside of firewood. So a lot of times as human beings, we accidentally bring these insects with us when we go camping, if you pack your firewood with you. So we just ask that if you're using firewood to go camping, or if you're heating your home with firewood, that you're buying it where you're burning it, basically.
The general public has played a huge role in helping state forestry officials track the emerald ash borer. If you see something, you're asked to say something. The best place to report your information and to keep up to speed on the spread of the emerald ash borer is go to vtinvasives.com. That's vtinvasives.com. A different unwanted pest is taking aim at a popular backyard shrub. Across the Fence spoke with UVM plant expert Ann Hazelrig about the viburnum beetle.
This is a beautiful row of viburnums, which is an important landscape plant for Vermont. And this year, for the first time in several years, we're seeing damage from the viburnum leaf beetle. This was a beetle that showed up in the last 20 years in Vermont, and it causes all this damage in the foliage of viburnums.
So tell me a little bit more about the viburnum leaf beetle itself. What's its life cycle like, and what does it do?
The viburnum leaf beetle overwinters as an egg, and in probably early May it hatches and the young larvae comes out. It's kind of a yellowish larvae, feeds on the undersides of the leaves. Kind of hard to see, but they get bigger and bigger, and they cause this sort of damage, this lacy look to the foliage. And the reason this pest is such a destructive one is that both the larvae feeds on the plant and the adult. So as the larvae feeds, it gets bigger. Eventually it crawls down the plant, it will pupate, and then adults will emerge. They'll come back into the plant, like in July, and resume feeding. So it really is sort of a double whammy for the plant, and over time it can defoliate the plant and actually kill plants over time. So what we're seeing now is the adults that are currently on the bush are laying eggs in the current season's growth, and you can see all these egg-laying sites. It's not the actual egg, but it's the adult cuts a slit and lays 8 little eggs in there, covers it up with plant parts and beetle cement, and that's how they overwinter.
What have you seen this year?
We're not sure why we're seeing the damage so heavy this year, because it was really heavy early on, and then it sort of dropped off. We weren't seeing any damage by the insect for several years until it sort of reemerged this year. So we're not exactly sure why, but for some reason this year it's been a good year for viburnum leaf beetle.
What should homeowners know if they're seeing some of this damage on their plants or thinking about getting some viburnum plants?
Right, so if you're considering buying a viburnum, they're great landscape plants, but there are resistant cultivars, so you should look for a resistant variety to this pest. That's the first step. The next thing, if you have viburnums on your land, go out and look at this current season growth, and in winter, probably before May, late April, go in and prune out these egg-laying sites and destroy them, because that's what's going to decrease that feeding population for next year. So that's one of the best things you can do, is just clip these out. Then in early May, late May, check your leaves for the young larvae, and there are some good organic controls that you can use on the larvae. And then again, you want to check your plants and look for the adults later on and control those with another another insecticide. But it's best to control the larvae with an organic insecticide while they're small, because you'll get the best control.
There is one more bad bug to highlight this afternoon. Earlier this month, Extension fruit and berry specialist Vern Grubinger warned of the spotted-winged Drosophila. It's an insect that attacks soft fruits like raspberries and blueberries. For commercial berry growers in particular, the insect can be devastating. Here's Vern with key information.
Spotted-winged Drosophila, or SWD, is a little fruit fly. not unlike what you would find in your kitchen when you have banana peels or other items in your compost. The difference is this fruit fly has a saw-like egg-laying appendage that lets it puncture intact ripe fruit and lay an egg in it. It can't get into very thick-skinned fruits like apples or even softer fruits that have a tougher skin like a tomato, but it really gets going on raspberries and blueberries and fruits like that. So the crops of greatest concern are fall raspberries because SWD tends to build up throughout the season, the late maturing blueberries, and things like peaches and cherries, which we don't have that much of in Vermont, but some people do grow them. This is a roll of insect netting. Many growers and gardeners are familiar with something called floating row covers, which has been used to protect crops against insects and also to create a warmer, more humid growing environment. You can use a floating row cover over your vulnerable crops, but insect netting is a little different in that it's somewhat more durable and it's specifically designed with a small mesh to keep the pests out. In the case of spotted-winged Drosophila, the mesh has to be smaller than 1 millimeter squared. So make sure and get the specifications of any material before you buy it so that it really will exclude the pest. Obviously, it has to go on before the fruits start to ripen and the pest is attracted to the crop. You don't want to put it on any earlier because you want to have pollinators get access to the flowers so that you'll get fruit, but delaying after fruit starts to ripen runs the risk of having the pest already in there laying eggs. Take, for example, these blueberries right here. They're still immature. They're green. There's nothing ripening, so there's no risk of infestation yet from SWD. It's only once they first start to ripen that you want to get the netting on, and after harvest, you want to take the netting off as soon as possible so it doesn't photodegrade and it'll last many years. As soon as any berries start to ripen, the netting should be on to prevent the spotted-winged Drosophila from attacking fruit. When you put the netting up, it's important to make sure that all of the edges and the entranceway are sealed, because any little opening will allow the pest to go in and defeat the purpose of having the net. If you have a structure that's been used for bird netting, for example, it may be suitable for hanging up the insect netting. And in fact, if you haven't had bird netting, you may get double duty out of the insect netting by also keeping the birds off. So although it's an expensive investment up front, if you take care of the netting and it lasts many years, you'll be paid back in a lot of sound fruit that would have otherwise been lost. The design of traps for spotted-winged Drosophila has been evolving very fast as researchers learn more about how to capture this pest and what it's attracted to. This is the current trap design that extension folks in New England are using to trap for spotted-winged Drosophila. Sometimes trapping is done just to monitor the population, but it's possible that using enough traps, perhaps one in every blueberry bush or every other, or one every 20 or 30 feet, we don't know yet, it could be possible to actually trap out the spotted-winged Drosophila and reduce the damage to the fruit. These traps are something that anybody can make because they use readily available materials like plastic red cups from the supermarket and black electrical tape from the hardware store, as well as wire and another little cup that's used often for dressings at delis and things like that. The idea here is that the pest is attracted to this black on red combination. And by drilling 1/8 inch holes, you allow this small insect to get in while keeping larger pests out, or larger bugs that may be attracted to the bait. The bait, in this case, is a little solution that's fermenting. So it's made from a combination of whole wheat flour, water, sugar, and yeast. So it's the yeast odors that really attract the pest, but you have to give it something to live on, and so it continues to give off odors. By putting it in a little cup like this that's had a hole cut out of the top and screen mesh put in, the pest can't actually get into the bait, so the bait stays uncontaminated and continues to ferment well. And the pest is then attracted to the second part of the bait, which is a drowning solution. So inside the cup, about an inch or so in the bottom, you would place a mixture of inexpensive red wine and apple cider vinegar, roughly 50-50. That goes in. It's also attractive to the spotted-winged Drosophila, but not as much as the yeast, so the combination together is a very powerful bait. by putting the little cup inside the big cup and then sealing it up so rainwater doesn't get in and fouling it, and hanging it in the bush near the fruit, preferably in a shady spot, because when it's in the sunshine the bugs don't tend to go to it as much. This is one way to try and reduce the amount of spotted-winged Drosophila that attack your fruit. This is definitely a challenging pest, but a lot of extension and research personnel are working on ways to manage it so that commercial growers and homeowners can continue to have an abundance of blueberries, raspberries, and other soft fruits. For UVM Extension, this is Vern Grubinger.
Thank you, Vern, and thank you for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.